welcome to another episode of the Diaries of Everything Ching. I want everybody to go ahead and grab their beverage, whether it is hot, warm, or cold. You know I do not discriminate. I wanted to come and talk to you guys about something that I feel like we can all relate to. Um, I know that a lot of times we go searching for our safe spaces, whether that be an actual space or a person. And I know a lot of times when we find our safe spaces, we tend to, I guess, overpour. And, in the beginning, it's always great because you kind of feel like you've built such a trust and you just feel so comfortable, and it's just natural for you to just go to that space and just unleash, unwind, and feel better. But what happens when that safe space now feels compromised? What happens when the space where you feel like you were able to freely express now becomes limited? What happens when you start to feel like a burden for doing something that you've known for so long? How do you redirect um, yourself? How do you draw back? What does that look like? And how does it affect, if it's a person, how does that affect your relationship? And if it's a place, now how do you feel when you walk into that space? And this is something I want to talk about because I feel like it happens often, especially with people who have small circles. Um, there's always someone in the circle that knows a little bit more than the rest, and that's usually the go-to person. That's usually the person you call when things are great. That's usually the person you call when things are bad. That's usually the person you call when you have a joke. That's usually, that's your first point of contact, essentially. And so when life changes, because at the end of the day, fairly speaking, everybody has capacity limitations. And in the beginning, not everybody kind of sets that limitation because it's all fresh, it's all new, and it's all great. But then as life starts lifing, the limitation starts to get put on. I think the problem becomes when it's not communicated. And then it's kind of feels like it comes out of nowhere. Like imagine you are just doing what you know, and then the vibes are different, the way they respond is different. You feel like they're not listening, their ears are closed, and they kind of have like a "are you done" type of energy. And you start to feel like, damn, like this person doesn't care anymore. And you find it so difficult to draw back because you've built such a routine with this person and such a bond and such a history. And drawing back, it's kind of like one extreme to another, because it's like you either extremely pour or you don't pour at all, and then that in itself can cause an issue because then the person kind of feels like you have a problem or something is wrong. And sometimes communicating that isn't easy because you don't want to sound selfish, because obviously they have their stuff. But I think it's really tough when you have somebody who you've grown to trust so much, and you've grown to, I guess, kind of depend on in that way, that when they are not available, like it's one thing to handle your stuff on your own, but there may be things that only they know that you didn't necessarily talk to anyone else about. So when they're not available, it kind of, you don't know how to kind of deal with that. I know it comes from a space of some form of dependency, an emotional dependency. um, and that's definitely something more within the person to work on. So that is obviously like what most people would say, like, okay, well, you're a little dependent or blah blah blah. But I mean, the bigger conversation here is everyone deserves a safe space. And that safe space is sometimes a place, like I mentioned in the beginning, and that safe space is sometimes a person. And so when that safe space is compromised, whether it is intentional, unintentional, whether it's just because life is happening, whether it's temporary, whether it's permanent, how would you suggest somebody to kind of navigate that? Because the obvious answer would be communication. But what happens if communication is not available? What happens if communication isn't the strong suit? What happens if communication isn't in alignment? How do we move forward? How do we develop another safe space? Is this now a safe space that we have to develop within ourselves? Is this now, and if it's a place, is should we now be looking for a new safe space? Are we in the times? Do we have the resources to find a new safe space? And if not, then what are the solutions? What does that look like? That is something that I feel is a very good conversation starter. I don't think a lot of people talk enough about losing their safe space, because when it's a person, a lot of times people like to talk about dependency and codependency, and how maybe it's not for them, or if they don't like it, or they find it annoying, and go be yourself, go be by yourself. Like, those are very obvious answers, but everybody's journey is so different. Everybody's experiences are so different, and we don't know what got them to a point to where this type of stuff affects them. And so it's easy for us to say what we would do, right? Because we know what we would do, but everybody doesn't have the same mannerisms. Not everybody has the same level of strength. Not everybody has the same resources. Not everybody has the same mind frame. Not everybody looks at those things like that. So I think, we have as much progress as we have done when it comes to mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, intelligence of all variants, and just kind of changing languages when it comes to dealing with those things. I think that in turn we have become very one-dimensional when it comes to resolution and what that looks like. And I feel like if we're going to be multi-dimensional with the different things that people go through and different experiences, then we need to be just as multi-dimensional about the solutions and what that looks like, because as we know, it differs for everybody. So that's just a dialogue piece that I wanted to put out, because it was something that was sitting on my heart and I wanted to share with you all. Please leave messages, comments. Let's have a further conversation. Let's help each other out. Let's, bring some perspective to what those solutions look like, to how to develop these safe spaces, how to withdraw from current safe spaces that aren't feeding you anymore, that aren't necessarily serving you anymore. Let's figure out how to develop safe spaces within ourselves, outside of resources that we may require, that we don't have. And let's really, focus on this healing journey. It's never finished. The healing never ends, because we're always learning new things. We're still experiencing things. And so, we're not going to know that it's wrong until we do it. We're not going to know that we should have went left if we don't go right. So, be patient with yourself. Give yourself grace. Understand that the journey's not over. Understand that you have so much more left of the story to write. We just want to bring in new perspectives. We want to share our experiences. We want to share how we've gotten through it, because at the end of the day, it can help somebody not only deal with what they're going through, but maybe avoid some issues, avoid some situations that they don't have to be in. So let's really open up the floors and let's have some real conversation with a side of empathy and grace. And until next time, y'all, cheers to a new episode.